Hi, so in this video, we're going to cover how to build a full stack monorepo using NestJS on the back end and NextJS on the front end. There'll be some tRPC in there to connect the two as like an internal API layer. It's a really cool stack, fully type safe end to end. We'll also cover deployment as well with Railway. So there's a lot of cool stuff in here. So let's dig in. A couple of things worth mentioning beforehand. There's a written tutorial which accompanies this video, which you should check out if you like words. That's linked below, and also there's the GitHub repo of the code that I write in this tutorial, also linked below. Let's dive in. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to be using pnpm workspaces for the monorepo. So to do that, you will need pnpm installed on your machine. So just a quick Google will show you how to do that. For now, we'll just do pnpm init, which will create a package.json in the project. So that's the first step. We're also gonna initialize Git, and we're also going to add a Git ignore file. Add some of the standard things. Build. That'll be okay for now. So as mentioned, we're going to be using pnpm workspaces. This will basically allow us to build a monorepo and make use of pnpm's speedy kind of package management. So to get that started, we will add a file called pnpm workspace.yaml. Inside of here, we're going to just define where the monorepo apps are located. So let's add that now. Cool. Okay, and then let's add this directory just in the root here. What we're going to do next is basically add the NestJS server. So what we'll do is inside of the app directory, I'm going to basically use the Nest CLI to create a new project. So we'll do nest new. I'm going to call the app server, which you can call it obviously whatever you want. We'll use the strict option here to basically make sure that it defaults to the TypeScript strict configuration. We're also going to skip Git, use this option. By default, Nest initializes a Git repo when you create a new Nest app, which we don't want to do. And the final one we want to do is make sure that we're using the pnpm package manager. So let's run that. Cool. Okay, so that's done now. So you can see here that it's created a directory called server inside of the apps directory, and it's basically added all of the Nest files in here. So we can just check that just first of all, just check that that's working. So let's just go in there and then do pnpm start dev. So let's just go and open that up. And yeah, cool. So our local server is now running. By default, NestJS uses 3000 port, but so does NextJS. So there's going to be an issue if we don't address that now. There'll be like a clash on your local machine when you spin up both local servers. So you could just basically update the Nest one to be 4000, but it's probably better to basically dynamically pull in the port, because when you go to deploy, the deployment service you use will dynamically choose that port, and it's best practice just to basically do this. In order for this to work, we need to use the NestJS config package. You just have to basically go into the Nest project, because that's where we're going to install the package, and we're just going to add it now. So it's NestJS config. So I'm not sure exactly why this happens, but when you're working in like a monorepo approach, it doesn't handle the peer dependencies in the NestJS project or the Next.js project. So when you go to install a package for the first time, you get this error. So the way around it is you just need to add the development dependency. Basically, we'll just go pnpm add dev here. that's going to install that package, and then that prevents this error from happening. If you might try and do this here, and you can see that the config module, which is what we need to add to the app module file to use the environment variables, it might not show up for you, so you might need just to quickly restart the TypeScript server. So you can just do that in VS Code. I've just done Command Shift P and then done here restart TypeScript server. So I'm now gonna import this and then go for root. So that now basically enables environment variables to be used across the NestJS app. So now let's go on to adding the NextJS app. By the way, if you're interested, there's a link below to a free NestJS course that I've got, which is really great for just understanding like the foundations of NestJS and worth checking out. Totally free, link below. Okay, so similar to creating the NestJS app, to create the NextJS app, we're going to go inside the apps directory and then use the Next CLI to kind of bootstrap the NextJS application. So we're going to go into the apps folder, and then for this we're going to do pnpx, and then it will be create next app at latest, and here we go. So I'm going to call this project web, as it's just as a simple name. You can call it what you want. We're going to use TypeScript, we're going to use ESLint, we're going to use Tailwind, not use a source directory. We're going to use the app router, and we'll leave it as no. And once again, we can just check that that's working locally. So we can just go now into here, and then the script to start the server is a little bit different for Next. So now it's saying that it's now running here. So we'll just spin that up, and there you go. So we've now got the Nest server running and the NextJS server running locally. So, okay, so in this next section, what we're going to do is kind of make some configurations to the pnpm workspace to make it all work a bit more seamlessly together before we go and add tRPC. So in order to use tRPC, we're going to need to share some types between the front and back, which is the whole point of using tRPC, right? So that, it's end to end and fully typed. But the challenge is that right now, the way that the TypeScript is configured is it's kind of limited to each project. So you can't kind of go outside of the project. So we need to basically tweak our configuration so that the projects can access types from each other. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to stop the local server that I had running and go back to the root of the project, of the Monorepo, and I'm going to add a tsconfig file. So in this tsconfig file, we're going to add, the plan is basically to add some default TypeScript configuration that the NestJS and the NextJS project can inherit from. So that we're not duplicating TypeScript configurations between the project. That's the purpose number one. And the other purpose number two is so that we can define these some kind of high-level global paths, which will again be inherited by the projects, and that will mean that the types can be shared kind of across projects. I'm going to copy from the written tutorial that I've got the TypeScript config, so you can do that as well by going to the link below, and you'll see I've got here the types tsconfig JSON, so I'm just going to copy that across. And so essentially these things here are used across both the Next.js and the NestJS config, so they're kind of shared. So that's why they're defined there. And these paths, this is essentially defining the paths for the project, so that the types can be shared across the projects. So now that we've done that, what we're going to do is go into each TypeScript config in the NestJS and NextJS app and edit those to kind of use and inherit this base tsconfig. So let's first go into the NestJS tsconfig here. And again, I'm going to copy just from the tutorial the NestJS config. If you like to, you can kind of go through yourself and specifically remove the duplicated ones. I've left them commented here to show you that they've been moved to the root config. So that's up to you. You can keep that, you can remove that. But essentially, the TS config is a lot more simple in the NestJS project now because a lot of it is inherited from the root. So that's done. Great. So now let's do the same for the NextJS project. So we'll go in there now, open up the TS config. I'm going to use the tutorial and just grab the NextJS config that I've got there. So here we go. So I've done that. Again, I'm going to remove the comments just to show you what has been removed. And there you go. Cool. So the next thing we're going to do to make our Monorepo development experience a bit better is right now, if we want to spin up the local server for each project, we have to check out into each one in a new terminal tab and then, spin up the local server. So I prefer just to create one kind of local dev script that I can just run and then it spins up both at the same time. Which for this kind of full stack monorepo approach makes a lot of sense, I think. So to do that, we could just need to go into the package.json script here, package.json file here, and we just need to add a script called dev, and then in the script here. So to do that, we're just going to do pnpm run parallel dev. So this is basically going to look in all of the apps scripts in all the projects you've got in here, and it's going to run the dev script. Now, in the NextJS project, that is the script to run the local server, but for the Nest project, it's not. Next uses start dev by default, so I'm going to change this here just to dev. So now they use the same. So now that I've done that, I can now just run from the root pnpm dev, and that is basically spinning up both locally. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that running this local server for both projects, and the next thing I'm going to do is just show you a trick about installing new packages. So what you can do. So as mentioned earlier, to install a package, you have to go into each project, go into apps, server, and then install it here. Every time you want to add a new package is a bit annoying. So there is a way where you can install packages from the root for a specific kind of app, a specific project. Here's how you do that. Let's imagine that we're adding the NestJS config package, which is what we added earlier. Let's just add it again to show you. So we're at the root, you just do pnpm add, and then it's NestJS config, and you just need to do a filter here. So we'll just do filter server, which is the name of the app, and that's it. Hit enter, and then you're done. So you just need to remember to add that little filter option at the end, and that's how you can add packages globally from the root. So now let's get to the fun bit, which is probably why you're here, which is around how you can configure tRPC to work with both NestJS and NextJS in a monorepo setup. So the plan is to basically first, inside the NestJS server, define our tRPC server, which will expose the types, and then inside of the NextJS project, create a tRPC client, which effectively uses the types from the server, so that you have kind of full end-to-end type safety, and you'll see it's a really smooth, neat kind of developer experience. So let's dive into that now. The first thing we need to do is install a couple of packages before we start in the server project. So we're going to, and those are pnpm add tRPC server, also the Zod package, and then we're going to filter by and add them to the server. server project. Cool. Okay, so inside of here, inside of the server app, we've just installed a couple of packages. We're now going to add a directory just called tRPC. And in there, we're going to just first start off with the classic NestJS module. Here we're going to add just the tRPC module and then add the services that we'll need. Okay, so we're going to go module, yep, and then we're going to do export class tRPC, cool, and then we'll just do this for now. Nice, cool, and we'll also just import this into the app module here, so that's done. tRPC module, cool. So that's kind of the tRPC module setup. We're now going to set up a service, a NestJS service. So we'll call it tRPC service, and it's essentially the purpose of this service is to kind of expose tRPC kind of API methods, but kind of put it behind this NestJS service so that it's kind of neatly wrapped away. It'll make sense as we use it. So first thing we're going to do is add the file. So we'll go tRPC, kind of sticking with the NestJS classic conventions here by using this file structure. That's pretty common practice in NestJS projects. So let's just add this now. So export class tRPC service, and we're going to add tRPC equals init tRPC. Okay, so you see how it's not showing up. Again, we have to just restart the TypeScript server to get that to kind of automatically pull in. So you see now it's showing up. I believe it is. So sorry, it's not that, actually dot create, and then we're going to expose a couple of methods. So we're going to do procedure equals this dot tRPC. We're going to do router, which again is this, and we're also going to do merge routers. Cool. Okay, so that's the tRPC service setup, and of course, to make this available, we need to add it to the module here. So I'm just going to import it. I've just seen that I've spelt it wrong. We should call it service, and then we'll just update that here. Cool. So now let's add the NestJS tRPC router. So the tRPC router is kind of like the equivalent of NestJS controllers. You know, the whole point of tRPC is really to be used as like an internal API, right? And so you're exposing kind of methods for a client to use. So instead of it exposing, traditionally you might have created some API endpoints via controllers and exposed those. But the whole point of tRPC is that you can kind of define these methods which are using API calls in the background, but it's kind of encapsulated in this really tidy way so that you don't need to worry about making these API calls, and you have a lot of control over what you can and can't do. So that is all enabled by tRPC routers. So we're going to define a tRPC router now. So what we'll do again is we'll add a file in here called tRPC router, and then we're going to do similar to before, export class tRPC router. So the first thing we're going to do is we actually need to inject the tRPC service that we just created, because we'll need some of the methods in there. So the first thing we will do is that. So we'll go private read-only tRPC service. Cool. So now we have access to the tRPC service. So what we're going to do next is define our router which is typically defined in tRPC as an app router, which kind of includes all of the methods that you want to expose. So we're going to add that now. And to add that, we're going to do this dot tRPC.router. And then in here, we're going to define, in this object here is where you define the methods that you want to expose to a client. In this tutorial, we're going to kind of add them in here, but as your project gets bigger, you might want to, split this out into separate files. There's a little bit more information in the tutorial if you'd like to explore that option. But for now, we're just going to add one method just to show you, we want to get it working and just to show you how it works. Okay, so what we're going to do is add a really simple method, and we're going to call this method hello, and this method is going to take in the payload, in the argument, an optional string, and if it's passed in, we'll use it. Otherwise, we'll default back to a fallback kind of string. So really simple, just to show you kind of how it works. We're going to use Zod, which is kind of like the default way to work in tRPC, as a way to kind of validate the payload that comes through and make it fully typed. It's a really cool package, worth checking out if you haven't tried that before. Very popular in the TypeScript community. So let's get into that now. So Copilot has actually started this for me. So the way to define a method is we will start with calling the method hello, and we'll start by using we'll use one of the methods exposed in tRPC service called procedure. So a procedure you can think of as one of these methods that you're exposing. So what we're going to do is, let's just focus on what we're going to return. So what we'll do is we'll do a query, and in there we will return hello Bilbo. Okay, so just to start with, super simple. This method, when it's called, returns a string hello Bilbo. But let's add a bit more to this so that we can really see the benefit of tRPC on the front end. So let's add, as I said earlier, an argument so that we can pass in an optional string. So to do that, what we'll do is we will use what's called an input here. And inside the input, we're going to use Zod. And essentially what we're defining here, like what this input method is you're basically defining what the payload should be. When someone calls this hello method in the client, should there be anything included in the payload? So what we're going to use is, as mentioned, we're going to use Zod to define that. So we will want to import Zod. Once again, you may need to restart your TypeScript server, but we are going to use Zod here. So there it is, Z, and we're going to basically add an object. And you can see here it has auto-completed it for me. So basically, we've defined that whenever someone calls the hello method, they need to include an object, and inside that object, there'll be a name property with a string. Let's also just extend this and make that optional. So it's an optional string. So to use this, so someone's passed in an object of name, and we're not using it yet. So to use it, we just need to go down here in the query and include the input here. So now what we can do is let's update this to go, if there's an input.name, if that's true, then we'll do input.name. Otherwise, we'll stick with Bilbo. So as I mentioned a minute ago, the way that tRPC works behind the scenes is it actually is exposing some API endpoints, and we just don't use them. The methods are used. That's instead of making API calls. However, the NestJS server still needs to know about those routes, and the tRPC effectively, the NestJS server needs to know about the tRPC server. So to enable that, to allow that to happen, we need to add a method in this tRPC router, which then will be called inside of the bootstrap function shortly. So we'll get to that in a second. The first thing we need to do is define this method. So it is an asynchronous method, and we'll call it apply middleware. It takes in a Nest application app as an argument. Okay, so before continuing, we actually do need to use a package in here. And so we're going to import it at the top here, and we're going to call it tRPC Express. There you go. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. So this is the package we need for this next step. So we're going to effectively use some Express middleware here, and this route here is effectively where all of the tRPC methods will kind of extend this route. So you can call this what you like. You might want to call it internal because it's like an internal API. I'm going to stick with tRPC for now. This kind of will be used in the client in the NextJS app. So just make sure if you change it, you remember that you've changed it in the next step. And now we're going to use the package that we added above, and we're going to use this here. So this is effectively adding some middleware to the NestJS server to make sure that the tRPC methods are exposed. Remember, the whole point of this is so that we have end-to-end fully typed. That's the kind of goal. And so this app router that we've defined, is going to expose some types so that we know that in the client, when we call this hello method, it's going to have in it that it has an optional name object with a name property in it, and also it's going to know that it returns a string. And so those kind of type inference is what we want to have on the client side. So to do that, we basically need to expose a type, a type that we can use anywhere else in any other projects. So let's add that now. We'll go to the bottom of the file here, and we will export a type called app router, which effectively what you're going to do is you're taking the class. So I've done it here for us. You're taking the class, and we are saying that in the class we want to infer the app router type. So this app router now basically contains all the type inference from all the methods in the app router. So in the next section, we'll be using this app router. We'll be importing this type when we create the tRPC client, which will give us that fully end-to-end, fully typed experience. It's also worth mentioning before we continue that the beautiful, really, I should say, thing about this setup is that if you're familiar with NestJS, you've now got full access to its dependency injection features. So, in reality, you can kind of think of these in the NestJS world, as I said, like controllers, and you don't really want to add all your business logic in the controller. You probably want to delegate that out to services, right? And so we won't cover that in this tutorial, but imagine you had a hello service in your NestJS app. You could import the hello service here, and instead of just returning the logic here, you could basically inject the hello service and use it here. So that's typically best practice in NestJS projects, and what I would do if I was building out a full stack app. So that's the great thing about this setup, is you kind of have that full dependency injection experience and all of those features. So it's really cool. So we're almost there now with the NestJS server. We just first of all need to make sure that inside of the tRPC module that we are exposing the provider that we've just added, the tRPC router. That's the first thing. And then the next thing we need to do is basically make sure that when the NestJS server is spun up, that we make sure that the tRPC middleware is kind of called. So let's add that now. It's worth mentioning that we do need to enable calls as well, by the way. So if you don't do this, you will get some inevitable cause errors down the line. So it's worth just adding that now. So now let's apply the middleware. So we're going to do const tRPC equals app.get. This is actually like this. Cool. And then we need to apply the middleware. So we'll just go apply middleware. So this is the function, that the asynchronous function that we defined a second ago that it's calling. So every time the NestJS app is spun up, it basically makes sure that it applies the tRPC middleware. So all the methods are now available and kind of exposed in this server. Great. So that's the NestJS server done. Great. So that's the NestJS server kind of spun up and done. It might be worth again just spinning up the local servers just to make sure everything's working. So we'll just do that. We'll do that here. So everything is working. I've got no errors. So happy to proceed. So the next step, we're going to add a tRPC client to the NextJS app to use the tRP server that we just made. Okay, so let's now dive into adding the tRPC client into the NextJS app. At the time of recording this video, NextJS 13 is relatively new. It is quite a big mindset shift, I think, for a lot of front-end React developers who typically have managed everything client-side, from state to making API calls and all of that. NextJS 13 is a shift, so that a kind of a big mindset shift where they're encouraging you to do a lot of the kind of heavy lifting network calls on the server side of the NextJS app. So just to be really clear, in our project, we've got a NestJS server and a NextJS server. So when I talk about the server of the NextJS app, I'm not talking about the NestJS app at all. I'm referring to the server of the NextJS app. Just because it's a front end project doesn't mean that it doesn't have a server behind it. Of course it does. So you can think that when someone on the NextJS app loads the homepage, that is making a request to the server for that homepage. So what NextJS 13, what they're encouraging you to do is to make any API calls, for example, on the server side when that request comes in, before and then return it back to the client. So none of those API calls are made on the client side anymore. All that being said, I'm going to show you two examples. We will use the tRPC client in the server side of the NextJS app, and we'll also show you how you can do it in the kind of classic client side, which maybe you're more used to if that's how you've typically done React apps. So let's dive into that now. So before we dive in, we do need to install a couple of packages into the NextJS app. So let's install those now. So they are pnpm add tRPC server at tRPC client, and we're going to add those to the web project. Cool. You might be wondering why the server package is required. It's actually a peer dependency, so we need to install it, otherwise we'll get that peer dependency error like we did earlier. So add those packages and you will see they've been installed in the web project here. Great. Cool. So what we need to do now is basically define a tRPC client inside of the NextJS app, which So we'll basically configure this tRPC client, which points to the tRPC server that we just made, and also make sure that we'll import the app router, which contains all of the type inference we'll need. So, so what we'll do is we'll just add a file called inside the app directory called tRPC. So that's fairly straightforward. We're going to basically export a variable that can be used inside of React server-side and client-side components. We're just going to call it tRPC, and it's going to use a method from the tRPC client package called create tRPC proxy client. This is where we're going to pass in the app router type that we exported from the server. So this is what is going to enable the fully typed end-to-end feature. So this is like super important. So here we have to just import it. So I'm not sure why it's not inferring it here. Someone might know if you're watching that. I think it might be to do with a VS Code import kind of configuration. So that's not working for me, but it's fairly straightforward. You can just manually import it. So like this, and it's done that for me there from using Copilot. But because we defined the relative paths earlier on in the tutorial, this is why we can just do @server, which is referencing the server project, and it's taking the exported app router that we defined there, and that's how we can grab it there. So we do need to add some things into here. So we need to add links, and I'm just following the tRPC documentation here. So we're going to need to do an HTTP batch link, and in there we define, here is where we define where the tRPC server is. Okay, so if you remember in the NestJS server, let's just open that up now. So in the tRPC server, we defined the middleware to use /tRPC. So we just need to make sure that whatever you use there, you're defining here as well. So my NestJS server is running on port 4000 tRPC. Now, when it comes to deployment, obviously this is going to break when you deploy it. So we'll just add a to-do here to use env. Cool. Okay, so we've now got a tRPC client. So now let's use it. So let's make use of this magic and use the tRPC to have this fully end-to-end kind of typed experience. So just to make sure you've still got both front and back end running locally. So again, you just do pnpm dev because we set that up earlier for them to run in parallel. Go to the NextJS project here. This is the home page you can see on my screen. We're going to just get rid of all of that, keep things simple. We're just going to do hello. Okay, great. So that's worked. It's a bit bigger. So what we're going to do is, first of all, do a server-side example. So using React server-side components. So to do this, we have to first, what we're basically going to do is use the tRPC client to make a tRPC call on the server side of the NextJS app. So it's going to basically make the API call, and then it's going to return that to the client, but it's going to do that work on the server side. So that's an asynchronous call we're making, the network call to the tRPC server. So we're just going to update this. You can only do this for server-side components. If you try and add this to a client side, it won't work. You may know that already. So what we're going to do is we're going to just call the tRPC client, the one that we just made. So we're going to do tRPC. That's just imported from the tRPC client that we just made, and it should now start to. Here we go. So it's now pulling in, giving me the available routers that we defined on the tRPC server. So if you remember, we added one called hello. We can just quickly take a look at that. Here it is. So we've defined this method. So if everything's working as it should, the type should say that I need to pass in an object with an optional name property, and the response of this method should be a string, right? So that's what we should see. So let's go back to to our our server-side component here, and we'll do so hello, and then query. So you can see here if I hover over this. So the first part is correct. So it's saying that there's an optional name property which we can pass in. So let's do that. So here you can see everything is fully typed. So we'll do my name. And as I said, this should return a string, which it does there as well. So let's just replace the hello with the response. Open up here, and voila, it has worked. So awesome. So let's just test this out and remove the optional property. It should say hello Bilbo, because that's what we defined again in the tRPC router. You can see if it's passed in, we use the name, otherwise we use Bilbo, and there you go, it's using it. So it's working, which is awesome. So let's now go over to back to the NextJS app. So as I said, this is server side. Let's now do a client side example. Okay, so just for this example, I'm going to add a component called client-side.tsx in the new NextJS 13. To define a client-side component, you need to define use client at the top. So we're going to do export default function client-side. There we go. So let's just first get this working. So we'll go I am client side, and then inside of the page here, what we can do is let's just use client side, and then we can drop in this here. So why don't we say server side? Okay, and then let's just go. Okay, cool. So we've got our server side, hello Bilbo, and then this is now on the client side. So let's now make the tRPC call from the client side. So this is kind of how, we're now going into the classic way of building React apps and everything that comes along with that. So that's going to basically using some state and using some using use effect hook. So let's use that now. So we're gonna do const greeting set greeting equals react.useState. I think I'm just gonna use the imported one there. Cool. So let's now basically add a use effect to do that. So we're gonna go use effect. Okay, and then we're gonna go tRPC. We want to use the import here. Cool. And we want to go hello dot query. And then let's just do a name called client side. Cool. So we're making that query, and then this is asynchronous. So we're going to do something here. So we're going to take the response from the tRPC query, and then we're gonna set the greeting to what the response is. So that should do it. So let's have a look. So it looks like it's done it there. So we've now got the server side call and then the client side call. So if we again just remove this name property and leave it empty, it should say hello Bilbo on both. Great. So let's now finish this tutorial off by deploying our monorepo and discuss how we can do that. And effectively, while the monorepo is set up, as one kind of big repository, in reality, we'll need to have separate deployments for each project inside of the apps directory. So let's cover that now. Let's go through and deploy this, both of these apps. We're going to use Railway, which is a really cool tool. I recommend checking out. It's free. It's kind of like a new and better Heroku, is my opinion. So let's do that now. So the first thing we'll need to do is the tRPC client is pointing to our local NestJS server, which is not going to work in a deployed environment. So we need to use a environment variable instead here. So I've added one into here, which you can do now inside the env.local file, and I have added this environment variable, and what it does is um, if you just add, say, the NestJS server and without this next public, that's not going to work on the client side, and we need it to work on the client side because we're making a client side API call. So that's why you need to prepend the environment variable with next underscore public. So I've done that, and so we just need to use this environment variable. So we'll go back into the tRPC client, and basically instead of doing localhost here, we will just drop in process.env.nextPublic. So that now points to the environment variable instead, which is great. So let's just again just make sure before we go into do deployment, just make sure that that's working kind of correctly. So just refresh here. And it is. We're not getting any errors or anything like that. So it is all working excellently. Okay, so in order to deploy to Railway, at the root of the monorepo in the package.json file, we need to define some scripts that Railway can use to build each respective app and then start each respective server. So it's fairly straightforward. I have them saved here to my clipboard, but I can just quickly talk through them. So this is the build command for the server app. So if you essentially what I've done is just gone into each respective package.json file and looked at what the build command script is, and then made sure that that is used in the respective command at the root. So you can see here that I've basically done pnpm filter by the server app, which is this one, and then run the build command. So I've done that for each app, and I've done that for the build command, and I've also done it for the start command. So the NestJS, to spin up a NestJS server in production, use the start prod command, which you can see here. So that's basically what I've done there. So I've now got the 4 commands that I need at the root of the project so that Railway can use them to do the deployment. So let's now go into Railway, and I've got it open here, and let's create a new project and set up these deployments. So what you can do is log into Railway, you need to create an account, go to add a new project, and then you can go and choose empty project here. This is gonna just spin up a new project. So you can think of Railway projects like a project is somewhere that you can package together all your apps. So we've got 2 apps. We've got the NextJS app and the NestJS app. So they're defined as services inside of a Railway project. And you've also got environments cool too. It's pretty cool. So let's first add the service for the NestJS app and deploy that now. So what we're going to do is go on to add a service. We will use a GitHub repo. I'm going to do, this is the repo that I just chose is the repo that we've been building in this tutorial. So when the service that you add, make sure that you choose the GitHub repo, which is the monorepo that you're working on, basically. So it's added this this GitHub repo. It's going to fail the deployment because we need to add some configuration to get it to work. So this service that we've added, remember we're doing a deployment for the NestJS app and the NextJS app separately. So this service here is going to be the NestJS app. So I'm just going to rename, the first step is just rename it to server. So it's really clear that this particular service is the server. Then we're going to go down here to the build command and the deploy command. So we're going to use what we just defined in the root over here to set these values. So the first one we want is the build server. So we just need to prepend it with pnpm because that's the package manager we're using. So the build command we want is pnpm build server. So we'll add that. We'll just jump down first to the start command. So for the start command, again, we'll just go back here and then grab it from there. And then again, we'll need to prepend with pnpm start server. So we'll add that. Cool. Okay, so that's added the build and the start commands. We'll also can set this watch path here, which is optional, but it's useful. So it basically means that it will only redeploy if there are changes made in a certain directory. And so for us, that is apps server, and then do two asterisks, however you say that, to define all files within that folder. Okay, so if you need to add any environment variables to your monorepo, not to your monorepo, to the net for the NestJS app, now's the time to do it. In this tutorial, we didn't add any, but you might have some for your project, to add them here. And then if you go to the deployment tab, you should now see them deploying. So it's deploying twice because it deploys it automatically when you set each of these. And I actually forgot that you should prepend this with a /. Okay, so they have both worked. So you can actually go into and look at the logs if your build or deployment failed, and if yours did fail, you should see the reason in here. But both of mine deployed, so that's great. But we haven't actually got a public URL yet. So to do that, we'll just hop back to the settings tab and then do generate domain. That's now gonna generate a domain for our NestJS server. If you remember, locally, I've still got my local server set up, and this is what should be returned from the NestJS deployed environment. So let's now have a look. Sometimes it can take a minute to load, but it's done it straight away. So great, that's awesome. So we've just deployed the NestJS server to Railway. Let's now do the NextJS app. We'll just come back here into the project, press new. Again, we'll choose the same GitHub repo. So we're choosing the Monorepo. And the setup is very similar to what we just did for NestJS, with one extra thing. So let's go through that now. So the first thing I'll do is, again, update the name just so it's really clear. I'm going to call this web. And then we'll go down to the build commands. And again, we want to come over here and just grab what we defined. So it'll be pnpm build web. And then the start script is pnpm start web. And then we will also define a watch path. So we'll go apps web. Cool. Okay, so this deployment will now fail, and that's going to be because of the environment variable. If you remember back in the project here, inside of the tRPC client, we are now referencing a environment variable. So we need to define that in Railway, otherwise it's not going to work. So here's what we'll do now. So we will go and add a new variable. We're going to call this next public. Okay. And actually, before I need to have the URL of the server. So I've actually got that here because I left the tab open. But if you haven't got it, so you want to go to the server that you just deployed in Railway, grab the URL, and then drop that here. And you want to make sure you remove the trailing slash at the end. So if you add that, so that will now automatically, you can't see it, that will now automatically redeploy. So what we'll do now is go over here and it's saying that it failed. So let's look into this because I was expecting it to work. No start command could be found. Okay, let's just go back to the, oh, it looks like it has done it again and failed. I'm going to keep this no start command could be found. So I'm going to keep this in the tutorial because it's good to do a bit of debugging. So if we go down and okay, for some reason it didn't save my start command. So I'm just going to go back, go to the package.json, and then it's the web. So we will go pnpm. I probably didn't press this tick. That's probably what happened. Okay, so that has now deployed. Again, we'll go to the settings and generate a public domain. Give that a few seconds to spin up. And when we open this link, it should open the NextJS app and be making tRPC calls to the NestJS deployed server that we have. So let's give it a go. Okay, it looks like it's done it. So I've got here is my local environment. So yeah, it's done it exactly as expected. So that's it. We've just gone through the whole tutorial end to end. Hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. That was a deep dive. You hung in there till the end. So well done to you. A lot was covered. Hopefully you've now got a great foundation for, building your next project. Really great setup for, if you're starting like a startup or building out, a little side project. Should allow you to move pretty quickly once you've got all that set up and build out the features you want. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. There are a couple of extra resources linked below. I mentioned it earlier, free NestJS course. I'm also working on a in-depth Learn NestJS by Projects course, which I'll link below as well. Anyway, thanks for your time. See you next time.